So as I said, panel 3, it's called Power to the People, creating conditions for more effective human oversight. So here we're trying to look at the ways forward, which is exactly one of the titles of the slides of Leila, and she already, I guess, opened the way for where, and of course Sarah as well. But I guess there were already hints of how can that effective human oversight can be done. We'll start then with Professor Simone. I'll briefly introduce her. Professor Simone Fischer-Hübner is a professor at the Faculty of Computer Science at Karlstad, has been a member of the Cybersecurity Council at the Cybersecurity and Swedish Civil and IT Security Authority since 2011. She's also a Swedish representative and vice chair of the IFIP Technical Committee 11 on Information Security and Privacy, and a board member of the Swedish Forum for Data SKID, an advisory, I'm sorry for my Swedish, an advisory board member of PETS, Privacy Enhancing Technology Symposium. Professor Simone, whenever you can, I'll help you with the setting up the presentation.
Thank you very much. And I really enjoyed also the other presentations, and much what was said maybe appears in different form also on my slide. Okay. Is it working? Yes. Okay, excellent. Good. Yes, so in my presentation, I will also relate to the AI Act and human oversight, and in the second part also come to the GDPR and human control by data subjects, and yeah, requirements for both. Yeah, AI, human oversight for AI. We have already talked about Article 14 for human oversight for high-risk AI systems, which are needed because, yeah, for AI systems that impact or involve risk to health, safety, fundamental rights. And here human oversight is required. And of course, we have AI risk like biases discussed, discrimination, inaccuracy, intransparency, extensive profiles. So it's very important to have also, from that perspective, humans in the loop. And actually this, to some fundamentals, yeah, how should I touch? Yes. So I go back to the problem that was also mentioned and refer to the automation bias and the problem that humans overly trust AI, or maybe this is an old slide, but it's okay, I see that. Yeah, anyhow, humans overly trust AI. And here I go back to Joe Weizenbaum that many of you have heard of or even met. He was actually guest professor at Hamburg University when I was a student there. So the debate in the 80s were much impacted by his thinking. So he actually developed the very first chatbot in the 60s, ELIZA. Many probably heard about it, and which was a kind of chatbot for giving some therapy to listeners. And yeah, actually, it was shown that ELIZA still scores better in the Turing test than GTP 3.5, which was recently shown. So it was not a bad system, but he noticed the ELIZA fact that actually people overly trusted and somehow associated the chatbot with a human. So people attributed understanding, empathy, and other human characteristic to the machine and to software and AI, and that was very shocking. So that is also the effect of over-trusting AI that was already detected in the 60s, and that's, yeah, that is the first conclusion also. That's why it's also very important to train and educate decision makers to be aware of risks of AI and that AI is different from humans, and yeah, AI has limitations. So I think that was also mentioned, education training, and I also want to emphasize this. what was already discussed also early on. Then secondly, no, the mouse doesn't work, sorry. I will use it.
It's not working, so
Yeah. Okay, good. Then I will. No. Okay, good. Okay, I use errors. Okay, excellent. Yeah. So secondly, what was also discussed by Joe Weizenbaum is that humans are not machines. So machines lack emotional intelligence, empathy, creativity. Or as he stated, there's a difference between man and machine. So humans are guided, human judgment is guided by values that we experience in our lifetime. Every second of our life, we have experiences that form our judgment based on these experiences. And this cannot be captured in code. While computers are only capable of calculation or judgment. So therefore, one conclusion was also there are certain tasks which computers ought not to be made to do, independent of whether computers can, whether these tasks can be made by these judgments or not. So for instance, Joe Weizenbaum gives the example tasks by a judge in a legal setting or psychiatrist. These are tasks that a computer simply should not do. Now in the AI Act, we also have these unacceptable risk systems where AI should not be used. I think Joe Weizenbaum even was seeing it much more, even other applications that imply high risks. Conclusions. It is important to make decisions that are based on critical human judgments and moral. So also we need a human in the loop that is indeed also morally responsible, as it was mentioned, and also makes decision based on moral standards and is also trained to do that. So probably we have a lot of experience in the past of AI systems where we had biases, gender biases, for instance, with recruitment tools that Amazon used, or ethnical biases that in a policing system that was used in the state of Florida 10 years ago, where very obvious biases also occurred, so that journalists here in the case of ProRepublica could reveal it very easily. And so I think if here we had a human in the loop that did also decision based on moral standards and critical thinking, a lot of harm could have been prevented. Yeah, this was the first part relating to the AI Act. So the second part relates to the GDPR. And here we also have requirements or restrictions on fully automated decision-making systems. So data subject has the right not to be subject to automated decisions. And we have also requirements about the information and what the data subject should be informed ex ante. And here we have requirements that the data subject should get meaningful information about the logic involved, but also information about the significance and the envisioned consequences. And here we have actually two different types of sorry, that now I see this is vice versa actually. So maybe go back. We have different types of explanation. So the logic involved is a kind of algorithmic explanation, how the system works. So we talk about structural explanations, and then we have explanation about the significance and the envisioned consequences. And that is a functional explanation. What is the functionality of the system? And and actually we did a user study about how both experts and non-experts understand and trust functional explanation of privacy-enhancing technologies versus structural information. So functional explanation explaining simply the functionality, and a structural which explains more how the system works, so more algorithmically. And interesting, both lay users and experts thinks that they understand better the structural explanation, so the explanation how the system works, and also trusted more, while both user groups actually understood significantly better the functional explanation. So that's why it's important to explain systems in a functional manner. So what is the core functionality, but also complement with structural explanation for enhancing trust in the system. So if users still have some kind of crypto paper which explains how it really works, so users would still trust it more. So this can be used to enhance reliable trust, but of course it can also be misused for nudging or for tricking users. So just gives them some nice fancy looking technical description and they will trust it even though they do not understand it, because they tend to understand more functional explanation. So here important also what type of explanation you use for what purpose to enhance understanding and also trust in a reliable manner. Then a second aspect, here work I did with my colleague Vitor, we also looked at automated decision-making by privacy assistants that can predict privacy decisions for users, for instance, how they would like to set privacy preferences or privacy permissions, or whether they would consent or not. This could be also predicted by AI, by privacy assistants, nowadays with more than 90% likelihood. So that can also enhance usability of decision-making. On the other hand, we also get a dilemma here. And we looked on different type of privacy decisions like setting permissions, privacy preferences, wishes of users, consent, and reject is to reject consent, to withdraw consent, and similar negative decisions. And we made a kind of structure what exists and also looked from a legal perspective. So fully automated decisions mainly do not work with the GDPR, because a consent needs to be manually given. So we need a confirmative action, a confirmation. Also for privacy permissions and preferences, this could be in conflict with the privacy by default principle, because by default you should have the most privacy friendly, so this should not be overwritten by an AI system. Interestingly, I think we think that reject as a decision to not to give consent or to withdraw consent, that could actually be automated. So GDPR doesn't say how to not to give consent or how to withdraw consent. So here the user could use a privacy assistant for negative decisions. And then for semi-automated decisions, we must also say that most research also shows that users want to have control. So papers that did user studies and also our own research show users want to have the final control. They do not want to have full automation. Semi-automation, we have here, of course, also ethical issues with nudging, because how to present the decision to the data subjects that they can make unbiased decision. So that is also an open challenge. So key takeaways: we need critical human decision, moral review needed, education of decision makers on AI limitations, usable explanations needed, and so that they also understood and users are not tricked, and we don't have the bias that was also mentioned, that explanation imply trust that is not reliable, and we also there should not be full automation of privacy decisions, maybe except for reject decisions.
Now we're moving to our second speaker, Dr. Jahna Otterbacher. Dr. Otterbacher holds a master in statistics and a PhD in information from the University of Michigan and Ann Arbor from the US, and also a master in applied linguistics from Boston University. She has worked as a visiting lecturer on management information systems at the University of Cyprus and assistant professor at Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. She leads the Cyprus Center of Algorithmic Transparency, the CICAT. Concurrently to this, she leads the Fairness and Ethics in AI Human Interaction group at CIENS, a new center of excellence and innovation. Her main research areas include algorithmic transparency and auditing, social and ethical considerations in artificial intelligence, human computation and crowdsourcing, and analysis and modeling of users' behavior. Dr. Otterbacher, thank you very much for being here. Pass you the floor.
Thank you very much, Vitor. It's a real pleasure to be here in the city of sun. I wish I could have brought you some more sun, but it's not bad, actually. So the way that I've structured this very short presentation is I first wanted to tell you, just take a couple minutes to tell you what we're working on in my research groups, and then move on to commenting on the questions that Vitor proposed for our panel. So at the Science Center of Excellence, we are closely working with the startup culture in Cyprus. So it's a small but growing ecosystem, our startups in Cyprus. And we work a lot with developers and software engineers who are not machine learning experts, but obviously they want to take advantage of, they want to use AI components and AI as a service a lot of times in the work that they're doing. I can tell you that a lot of them are not even very aware of the AI Act, and they're certainly not experts on auditing. So we do a lot of work to develop methodologies as well as tools to help them understand how some of these things work and the kinds of behaviors that they display before they incorporate them into their own products and services. So this is an example from a recent project called Keep an Eye, a methodological approach for identifying social stereotypes. It focuses on computer vision modules. So the example that you see on the screen is of image tagging services, which of course are very easy and economical to use, whether you're using Clarify, Google Vision, things like that. Super easy to use, can inject a lot of functionality into what you're building, but can behave in ways that you don't expect. Not in ways that are necessarily in violation of the law, but things such as the perpetuation of social stereotypes, which you might not want to have in your product or service. So in this particular platform, how it works, what it does is essentially the user can upload a set of images that they want to use for the test. The images are then processed by the AI services of interest. And then, as you can see, images are described using word tags. And then we recruit crowd workers to evaluate their appropriateness. The arrow, right? In this particular setup, our crowd workers are being asked first to interpret the meaning of the tags, which is not always obvious, as they're used to describe a particular test image. And then they are also asked to judge the appropriateness, given a particular use context. So, for example, they might be asked, assume that this would be used in a social dating application versus a human resources application. Is it appropriate? Yes or no? And then, of course, the platform also provides a bunch of different analytical tools, such as looking at the types of tags that are used to describe certain demographics of individuals who are depicted in images versus others. And this is a way of revealing some of the social stereotypes that are being perpetuated by these tools. Now, turning over to the university, as you would probably imagine, we conduct more basic research here. One ongoing topic of interest to us is the behaviors of different stakeholders, including end users and also crowd workers. So, for example, a few recent titles you see there on the screen. We're looking at ways of being able to identify when and where crowd workers perpetuate their own social biases when we're conducting different tasks. And recently, we're also looking into when and where they are using generative AI tools in crowd work tasks rather than doing the work themselves fully manually, let's say. Another thing that we're very passionate about, don't worry if you can't read what's on the screen there, is an open and distance learning course that we've been running for the past few years, which we've called AI in Everyday Life. So it's open to the public. We assume no technical knowledge, and our goal is to raise AI literacy in the area, of course, and we've actually run it also in collaboration with colleagues at the University of Trento in Italy with their non-computer science students as well. And hopefully we'll be running it again this year. One exercise that we always like to do with our participants, I should say this is an 8-week course. It's 2 ECTS. What we like to do is to ask them to explain what is AI to a youngster. And we ask them that question at the beginning of the course and then after the course, in order to see how their perceptions change over time. Okay, now that brings me to, and I am going to come back to the issue of education because of the public, because I'm very passionate about it. So that brings me to the first question that Vitor sent us, which is what are the key elements to enable oversight? And my first response to that is that we require, if we want developers to be involved in this, we need a structured yet modular framework that they can apply in different scenarios. So this is a figure from work by one of our PhD students, Kyriakos Kyriakou, and he's proposed a modular oversight framework. Again, the users of this framework are meant to be developers and software engineers who want to incorporate an oversight module when they are interested in using one of these black box components in their work. And so hopefully you can see in the picture that it consists of obviously the process, but also guidelines and a toolkit, which includes things like task templates, as well as data cleaning and aggregation processes. The second element that I want to mention is diverse evaluators, which are required if we're going to detect some of the issues that were mentioned earlier as well. And I'm glad that the idea of the society in the loop was mentioned earlier as well. And also it was mentioned that unfortunately this solution is not actually feasible. We can't implement it empirically. So Kyriakos argues in his PhD that, while we can't implement that, we can try to identify what is the target group that would be using a particular application and then recruit a simulated society in the loop, but that requires us to monitor what he calls diversity factors. So depending on what is the nature of the evaluation task and what's the nature of the target application, it may be relevant to understand their demographics, their cultural background, their linguistic background, and various life experiences. This is work in progress. I do not know how feasible it will be to do this, particularly in a real-time system, but we do have, well, one of our initial questions is it even possible to find crowd workers who are willing to do this? Because it's a lot of work for them. They need to return back time and time again to complete tasks for us. And of course, workers who are active at microtask commercial platforms are not accustomed to doing that. So we have had positive experience, but I should say with particular platforms such as Prolific. Don't try it on Amazon Mechanical Turk. Don't try anything there. And this brings me to another one of the questions that Vitor posed for us, which is what are the types of interfaces that work? And this is probably an obvious answer to that question, but it depends on who we want to be involved in the evaluation task. So I spent a lot of time talking about working with crowd workers. We also like to work with members of the public. Obviously there, we cannot assume, as we can with crowd workers, that they are accustomed to performing a timed short task. And we also need to use more simple language, as you can see by the example there. This is another one of our platforms. In contrast to OpenTag, Keep an Eye, OpenTag is meant to be used with members of the public. I'm going to end on this admittedly kind of busy slide. So this figure is trying to communicate a vision for, I probably shouldn't call it oversight, but AI evaluation at scale. So obviously on the left, you see the trustworthy AI principles. I think trustworthy AI is a beautiful vision. I'm not really sure how realistic it is, but I think it's worth aiming for that. On the right side, you see this idea that now with the rise of generative AI and foundation models, really the sky is the limit. The types of applications that we're going to see in the future, we really cannot even predict what they are. And so the idea is that, or what we're arguing for, is a socio-technical infrastructure that facilitates the evaluation of AI applications by real-world users in the application context where they're encountering them, since we can't predict where they're going to find them. And then obviously we need, as I mentioned, a very structured approach to doing this. And we're going to attempt this year in AI in everyday life to come up with tasks and data aggregation mechanisms to do this with our participants. I should say we're interested not in their unfounded opinions about things that they encounter in the wild, but what we want them to do is to report in a structured way the machine behaviors that they observe, and then evaluate them again in a structured way so that we can aggregate that data and come up with some conclusions as to how everyday users experience things in the wild. So that's it for now. Thank you very much. Oh, I do want to say thank you very much to my collaborators and students who work so hard on all of this with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Otterbacher. And now we're moving to our last speaker of the day. He's an online speaker. Dr. Johann Laux is a British Academy postdoctoral fellow at the Oxford Internet Institute. He studies legal, social, and governmental implications of emerging technologies such as AI and big data. His current research projects ask how human oversight over automated decision-making can be improved and implemented effectively. He also works on the governance of emerging technology projects and researches the impact of personalization and targeting on citizens and consumers. Dr. Laux, are you with us?
Yes, I am. I hope you can hear me.
See you. I believe.
Can you hear me?
Just give me 1 second to prepare them.
Yes.
To take the previous presentation.
I'm currently sharing my screen, and I hope you can hear me.
Just give me 1 second, please.
Sure.
So I guess, yes, I guess maybe
Correct.
I'll put it like this. Yes, you can start. Thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. Let me jump right into it, given that time is limited. So I want to share with you two things today. And in the true sense of interdisciplinarity, they're not going to be technical solutions on how to maybe improve human oversight. So the first thing I want to discuss with you is the idea of institutionalizing distrust. And that's a framework that stems from democratic theory and operates more on the abstract and principles-based level. And the second thing I want to share with you are some insights from an experiment I ran, which draws on a framework from law and economics and is more situated at the organizational level. So just to sum up what basically the contributions today were about, kind of the problem statement is, of course, the questions whether real human oversight workers can meet the law's expectations for human oversight. And summing up the great contributions of today, we can bucket maybe the problems we might expect into two groups. One is the human oversight workers' skills and their competence, and the other one is their incentives and whether they have the right incentives and motivations to do their job well. So what is coming to the first framework that I want to draw on, stemming from democratic theory, that's the idea of institutionalized distrust. So one of the lead authors in the field, Piotr Stomka, has put it this way, calls it the paradox of democracy, precisely because foundational principles of democracy imply some degree of institutionalized distrust. Trust within governmental environments can emerge. So what does it mean? So it means basically to utilize some reasonable distrust we might have into the humans that distrust in the humans that work in democratic institutions, and use that distrust to design our democratic institutions, right? So the idea, again, is not that citizens should actually distrust the governments and the democratic governments, but to use that distrust to provide some kind of insurance, or to provide some insurance for those who are willing to risk trusting democratic governments. And in one paper from 2023, and I have all the references on the last slide, I applied that thinking or that framework to AI governance. And that would mean to distrust the abilities and motivations of human overseers. We should kind of expect them also to fail at their role, and based on that distrust, design how we want to implement human oversight on the institutional level. And that might then allow us to place a trust in AI systems in a non-naive way. And what is the outcome of that institutionalizing distrust thinking is a principle-based approach. And in my paper, I come up with 6 principles about how to implement this institutionalization of distrust. So the first principle is legitimacy. Then we have periodical mandates, collective decisions, limited competence of institutions, justiciability and accountability, and transparency. Now, I won't have time to run you through every single principle here, but I want to try to at least get through 2 because I think they resonate well with the discussion we've had so far. So the first principle is that of legitimacy. So basically, again, coming back to the field of democracy here, in democracy, power requires justification. That's something that Ben Green, in the paper that he presented earlier, also stresses again and again. And I'm drawing here on his ideas. He says, well, if you use an AI system in a government framework, then you have to justify your use of the AI system and the human oversight system you want to implement to mitigate the risks of that AI system misbehaving. And one way to do that is testing the human oversight framework you're suggesting to implement. And I think that is great. And I have actually written an entire PhD thesis about why this kind of testing approach, this behavioral testing within government, is really important for the legitimacy of democracy, but I don't have time to present you my PhD thesis, but I just want to mention one point. Testing is great if you have good metrics, right? For example, if accuracy is the right metric to test, and you can do that, then all these pre-tests of human oversight schemes are great. But with fundamental rights, a lot is very dependent on the individual case, and we might have some indeterminacy. Because we might also not be able to agree on what a good normative outcome is. And there, I want to just highlight how democratic theory can have a contribution here too, because if we don't have good metrics in terms of we can agree on what the right normative outcome is, we can do a second thing. We can revert to plan B and do what in democratic theory is called negative institutional design. Instead of knowing what the right decision is, we can at least agree on what we don't want the decision to be based on. To give an example, bias. Bias might be something that we want to exclude. And if we look at Article 14 of the AI Act, we see there an explicit mentioning of automation bias. Now, we can say that automation bias is not the only bias that is relevant here. We might also wonder why it's explicitly stated there, but at least we can rationally reconstruct it as an attempt of negative institutional design. So whatever the right outcome is for the human oversight mechanism in terms of maybe a question of fairness, we at least don't want the outcome to be based on automated decision making. So this is one example of how this principle of legitimacy in a democratic theory sense even provides us with fairly concrete answers as to how we may design human oversight. Another example is periodical mandates. So in democratic governance, we usually limit the terms of office, right, to avoid that someone accumulates a lot of power in office, and also to have diversity of office holders, because we might have some really bad office holders. We also want different perspectives to be in charge, right? We had an example of personal experiences mentioned earlier of racial discrimination, and that is really valuable, right, for everybody to learn from. So applied to human oversight, we might think that, especially in a larger organization, if one gets assigned with the human oversight task, that over time they become really dependent on that job, right? They might just start play ball with the organization that hires them to be human overseers, and they don't want to overstep what they might perceive as their limits, and raising certain issues that they might think will lead to them being fired. Also, again, I mentioned that we want diversity of the perspectives of those who exercise human oversight functions. So it can address the problem of motivation and incentives, and also to some degree of experience and competence, but also at the same time, maybe it takes some time to learn the ropes of being a human oversight worker, right? So with experience, they might actually become better at the job. So I've just mentioned this because working with such a principle-based framework means that you sometimes will have to balance between the principles, right? Because the principle of legitimacy wants our oversight workers to be very competent, but then if we limit their mandate, then that might be detrimental to their competence, but it also fulfills an important function to solve the problem of incentives. One thing I want to mention is, because I think it was asked in one of the questions, is about auditors, external auditors for human oversight functions. If you were to introduce something like that, where third parties do important human oversight work through auditing, then you may want to think about whether rotating auditors is really important, and that is an outcome of work I've done for about the recent legislation in terms of platform regulation, where auditing plays a huge role, and there might be the risk of audit capture, because the players who you might audit, there might just be very few, so you might start catering to their interests too. And I think that is something we can learn from a regulation in the financial field, in terms where after the financial crisis of 2008, there have been some changes in the rules of auditing, and mandatory auditor rotation, for example, has been introduced to avoid certain ball playing between the auditor and the auditee. And I think here the principle of periodical mandates is also an institutional response to such risks that might be posed in terms of capture and auditing and human oversight here. So I'll skip over collective decisions, because I think the previous speaker, Jahna, she already mentioned a lot of crowd workers and how they might be introduced. So I don't want to repeat that here. Those were excellent, interesting points. I just want to summarize as regards to the framework of institutionalized distrust and democratic theory. I think it allows us to anticipate systematic failures of human oversight workers and to provide institutional safeguards against them. And we can draw on some of the blueprints from how we design democratic systems here and break them down and apply them to designing human oversight. And that speaks to making human oversight effective. And now just a minor comment on the organizational level. What organization want is, yeah, maybe effective human oversight to be compliant with the law, but they definitely want oversight to be efficient. And there I just want to very briefly share something that I've done. I've done an experiment with data annotators. Data annotators are, of course, not human oversight workers, but there might be some similarities here. And so on the right, you can see an image, and we gave them the task to classify images of building entrances and to tell us whether or not they're barrier-free or not barrier-free for wheelchair users. And now we then drew on crowd workers to fulfill this annotation task. And we had two factors that interested us. The first factor, you see that on the left, is the instruction design, clear rules versus vague standards, and the payment. Now, rules versus standards, that stems from law and economics. And the difference is, it's basically, you can choose if you want to have a norm, say what is barrier-free, you can choose the form in which you formulate it, either as a rule or as a standard. Now, take the example of a speed limit, right? You can formulate it as a rule and say you should not drive faster than 55 miles per hour. It's pretty clear. So the rule applier only has to check how fast she's driving, and she knows whether she's breaking the speed limit or not. You could also formulate it as a standard and say, you should drive with reasonable speed. And then the standard applier, she now has to first interpret what is reasonable and then check how fast she's driving and then try to figure out whether she's breaking the norm or not. Now, why it's law in economics is because behind that is the question of allocating costs. It's very costly to design rules for the rule maker because they have to collect a lot of information up front, versus with a standard, they can just be vague and push the decision costs down to the standard applier. And I'm mentioning this because in the AI Act, human oversight should be designed in a way where the AI developer instructs the AI user on how to implement oversight. And I think in our analysis, we should start to look at, as AI systems are rolled out under the AI Act, what are they choosing? Are they making life easy in the way and trying to save costs by formulating standards and be vague? Or can we maybe, does it make more sense for them to formulate rules because then they can guide the user better? On the other side, with that also comes a question of who has how much discretion in interpreting the norm, right? With a standard, the AI user would have more discretion. They can draw on their own expertise. So maybe if you're designing an AI for a doctor, it might make sense to formulate it as a standard because the doctor may know better than the AI developer about what the right risk mitigation strategy is here in this regard. So I'm just saying that this framework of rules and standards can actually be very helpful when analyzing the instructions for human oversight. And the second thing which I want to come to, because it was mentioned at the, I see I have only 2 minutes left and I'll sum up in a second, because it's about, we used online laborers from an online labor platform, so crowd workers. We also gave them, everybody got the same base pay in our experiment, but we also gave one group a better pay if they achieved a certain accuracy level, and wanted to see if that motivates them to work better and achieve better results. And just to sum up my talk here, in our experiment on data annotation, and again, we can't generalize here for all kinds of human oversight schemes, but the rules condition, as you see here on the top left, they had highly more accurate results than those with the standards. Forget here about the incomplete rules condition, that's in the paper. And the payment condition, so getting the incentive, which means this accuracy-based bonus payment, had only marginal effects, but the best performing group that we had in data annotators were those who are working under rules and with the financial incentive. And I'm just mentioning that because, again, in the opening comment by Ben Green, we had this strong case for testing human oversight before it is deployed. And I just want to say, hey, we did something like that. It was for data annotation, but human oversight could be relevant. It could be very similar here. It didn't cost the world to run this experiment, at least if you're an AI company or an AI user with bigger pockets than a researcher and a postdoctoral research fellow like me. Doing this is practicable. And with that, I just want to sum up my short insights into 2 frameworks that I hope can help improve the implementation of human oversight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Laux, and thank you for all the speakers of this panel. We're already a bit past our time, but I was hearing the presentations and also having a look at some of the past questions of the event, and some of them have to do with auditing, and of course we deal a lot and we addressed a bit that during today of the oversight in itself. It has an auditing relation, let's say, but I was thinking of who polices the police. So how do we audit the oversight? So this needs to have a quality assessment, of course. How is this manageable? How is this how is this evaluated, or what suggestions do you propose? And I would like to address possibly the speakers which are here, if they have any thoughts on that. Any of you would like to?
Yeah, of course, we need clear rules and standards how decision makers should act, and according to which we can then audit the decision makers. So yeah, so they need clear guidance also how they should oversee decisions. And yeah, as I mentioned, important that they also critically review, that they also decide according to their empathy, feelings, moral. So we as humans, we make decisions not only logically, we also do it according to feelings. And there should be also guidance that you do not only have to decide strictly logic is important, but you should also use your heart or your feelings, and use your empathy and moral standards. That what I would recommend, but also is important for human beings, in contrast to machines that do decisions according to logic.
So two thoughts here, one from my crowdsourcing work and one from working with the members of the public in the AI in everyday life course. So, you know, there are standard things that you do in crowd working to audit your workers to make sure that they're giving you quality data, whether you use the gold standard questions or you know, aggregate the data and understand who tells you what. So Kyriakos, my student in his framework, is indeed collecting all sorts of data from his simulated society in the loop, including the big five, personality, all sorts of things, political values. And it's very time consuming, but if you want to try to understand who someone is and how they tend to respond to AI evaluation questions, then you need to do it. So it's time consuming and it's expensive. And then in the AI in everyday life course, we don't collect a lot of personal information from our students, but obviously they agree before they start the course that we will be analyzing all of the data from the assignments and exercises for research purposes. And so we can sort of understand how their understanding of what we are asking them to do evolves. And I think it brings up interesting questions of when someone who has no previous training has the right competence in order to be able to give you feedback, which is useful.
Dr. Laux, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would just like to add that when it comes to human oversight, and we want to see more of the systemic effects over time. So how is the AI performing? How is the human oversight performing over time with a larger number of cases? One question that I'm asking myself is whether we're going to see something that is similar to what we've seen in AI ethics in general, this kind of emergent ethics auditing industry where you have big players like the large consultancies that offer like checklist ethics checks on the ethics of the AI systems, the morality of your AI systems, and very small services that are based, maybe some researchers come up with a great test for fairness or something, and then you have maybe like 3 or 4 real world instances where that test is actually useful. So they are not scaling their approach in the same way that the large consultancies are doing their probably comparatively thinner checklist tests. So I just don't want to see I don't know yet whether human oversight is going to be the next kind of like probably smaller market for such auditing services. But if so, if these third-party auditors, which I'm not saying they're not important and they don't have an important role to play, but if they are being introduced into this human oversight ecosystem, then I definitely want to see certain regulatory provisions so that it's not like a very, very small field of players auditing the same players repeatedly and leading to problems that we have seen, for example, in finance roughly probably 15 to 20 years ago, No, not that much. 2008 is, we have 2024, 16 years ago. So, so yeah, I would just like to raise the awareness of that.
Thank you. Do we have, I know that we don't have questions from the live audience, from the online audience, from the room. Is there any question? I see one hand, so I'll reach out there.
My question's for Jahna. The trustworthy AI principles that you've listed on, I think it was the last slide, would you say that if you developed your generative AI model, excuse me if I'm not using the right terminology, if you developed it in accordance with ethics by design, would that cover all the principles that you've listed under your trustworthy AI?
Thanks for the question. I don't know is the honest answer. And it's actually not what I work on. What I primarily work on is the human perspective and the human interpretation and experience of all of this. So I'm much more interested in how the user evaluates, for example, fairness in different contexts for a particular application. If I had to venture to say, though, I would say no, that it's probably going to be a trade-off. I mean, we know, for example, between privacy and transparency, clearly there are trade-offs there. Between accuracy and fairness, there are also trade-offs. So if I had to venture to say, please don't quote me, I would say no.
Okay, I have a less provocative question, which is considering that I guess the whole purpose of AI is to automatize processes and to expand them, make them do things quicker and in much bigger volumes. I would guess that in many situations there will be many decisions happening, so many that it's absolutely difficult to conceive a human oversight. So I would say that possibly in some situations, the best we could rely is on a sample oversight. Would you say that in some situations that's the best that we can get? Dr. Laux, any thoughts?
Well, sorry. Can you repeat the
So
the
basically, this is something that we were discussing the other day when we were preparing the panel, is that most likely in some situations, the best you would get is actually having a sample oversight, an oversight of a sampling of the decisions that were made. Would you agree that that's the best we can get in certain scenarios?
Probably. I mean, that really depends on context. And I hope that those on the panel with the background in statistics can at least guide us towards the right sample that we should look at. But I mean, honestly, even if you look into law enforcement, you know, when it comes to rights violations, we only ever get a fraction and a sample. And we need to make sure that those cases that get highlighted get enough attention, and also potential solutions, that they have some guidance function, that they can motivate and also coordinate appropriate responses in the entire industry, probably even amongst industries. But I don't know if that's like fully answering your question.
Any reaction from you?
Depends very on the context. So if you have a safe driving cars, it makes a decision every second, right? So surely the human cannot come in all the decisions, right? Then it would not work. While if you have a medical application to detect cancer, I would like that also a medical doctor judges. And so I think it's very much dependent what is, contextual.
This is something that we've actually thought a lot about, because we primarily work on vision and language, and the output is much more unpredictable as compared to decision support systems typically. So we've thought about, for example, well, which images should we use? how many images should we ask one particular crowd worker to annotate? Because, you know, each time we feed a different image into the system, we get some new output. So yeah, I think this is why I have this crazy vision of being able to do these kinds of analyses on a large scale, because with generative AI, this is going to get even more unpredictable.
Sure. I will conclude now the panel. Thank you very much, Dr. Laux, Dr. Simone, and Dr. Otterbacher for being here.